Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 216. I'm so glad you're here. I had a great conversation with our guest today, Katie Keene, the founder of the Greater Honor Special Needs Family Membership Community and Her Home and Heart podcast. Katie is a homeschooling mama who has profoundly special needs kiddos, and the conversation really centered around the challenges and the difficulties that we as parents face when we are homeschooling kiddos who are so far outside the box that it's hard for others to understand, and it's hard for us to understand sometimes and to get a rest. Really good conversation. I know that you'll get a lot from it, and you will love Katie as much as I did. Before we begin, special shout out to CTC Math, our sponsor. We love CTC Math. We use it in our homeschool, and we are so grateful for all of the support that they've given. Please check out ctcmath.com as well as readingeggs.com, a sponsor that's new to us, and we absolutely adore them and are so grateful for their support. We'll talk a little bit more about both of them later on in the podcast, but in the meantime, pop your earbuds in and get ready for this great conversation with special guest, Katie Keene. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Well, hey there. I am so excited to have a new to me guest on the podcast. We've been having a great conversation, so I'm looking forward to sharing her with you. Katie Keene from Her Home and Heart podcast. Katie, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
Oh, it's an honor for me too. I can't wait to have this conversation and to talk about you and just all of the things that you have to offer our families. So there are lots of families here who listen who have gifted and twice exceptional kids, but then there are also families who have special needs in all sorts of different areas. You know, when you're wired differently, when you have a family who's wired differently, you've got all sorts of wiring challenges in your home, and it runs the gamut. So this is going to be a really good conversation because you come at it from some of those really severe special needs and homeschooling through those challenges. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself and your family and your background to our listeners?
Sure. So I am a former Navy wife and Navy child. My husband's now retired, but we moved around the world a lot, and I have 5 children. Their diagnoses are all the way from gifted to profoundly disabled and pretty much everything in between. So we've experienced a lot of the, like you said, all the things that kids can go through. And currently we live in the DC region, and I am passionate. Our family is passionate and on a mission to support families around the child with the needs, because over our years, our 2 decades now of being in the special needs world, we've seen so much lack of community and understanding and the kind of support and connections that are necessary to keep a family thriving when they're under so much stress.
I love that. You said you had 5 kids. Are they all home still homeschooling, or can you tell me a little bit about their ages and maybe just a little bit about kind of like what you go through on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So the youngest just turned 9 and the oldest is 19. So we do have one graduate. The second in line has a lot of different learning diagnoses. So she will be in school longer, although she is in many areas quite gifted. We have other areas that are just taking a long time. And then I have a 14-year-old and a profoundly disabled 10-year-old. So 9 all the way to 19. Life here is a lot of fun, a lot of chaos. And we do homeschool. We have homeschooled everyone. Our oldest, though not in college, likes to say he is in entrepreneur college at this time. He is very business minded and very much excited to see what God's called him to for, offering to the world.
I love that. And it's so interesting to me because that age difference, we have the exact same age difference from our oldest to our youngest. It's a 10-year age gap. And it's so interesting. And I don't know your experience, but I was always like when I was pregnant with my youngest, I was like, this is going to be great. There's 10 years between them. They're going to be, he's going to be so nurturing to his younger brother, blah, blah, blah. They fight more than anybody else, I think. Just that decade in between, my oldest has kind of forgotten what it was like to be 10. And so they have they kind of hit against each other, but then it's like they love intensely and they hate intensely and they go back and forth. There's no like middle ground with them. I don't know what your experiences are with the kids, but the dynamics are so interesting to me with that kind of age gap.
That's hilarious. Our oldest actually he was born an old soul, as some people might say. And he will frequently say to himself when he's struggling with something, what would my 40-year-old self do? Which is hilarious and I think very unique to him. So he actually doesn't really get in the mix too much with the younger ones. But we do have quite a few oil and water type combos in this house. And it gives us the opportunity to teach a whole lot of just conflict resolution and love and grace, even when people are not perfect. And so we try to gear it that way and prepare them for life through looking at it like an opportunity.
Yeah, that's so funny. We try that too. There's a lot of chaos in our house, but that idea that, we're all a family team and we all bring strengths and weaknesses to the table, and it would be a boring place if we all had the same strengths and the same weaknesses. So we need to support one another wherever we fall. And so it's interesting and important, right, to help our kids see those differences so they can support each other, because then they'll go out into the world and be able to self-advocate, but also advocate for others when they see that others are struggling. Yeah, I love that.
It's really important. And I know in our home, having a son who's profoundly disabled, he's nonverbal, he has a very life-threatening form of epilepsy, many, diagnoses that are really challenging. And in our home, it has actually grown the compassion of our children. And so they can now look beyond the external of people. And so when we're in community and see other people who have disabilities, even years back when he was still pretty small and the disability wasn't as significant, it really has been a very big shift when we are able to extend that grace and see that person, whether they're perfect or not. No one's perfect, but to be able to accept them in their imperfection, in their good moments, in their bad moments, it does transfer outside of the house. And it's a huge way to help prepare our kids for real life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important for us to have those conversations with them and for them to hear that and be able to show that compassion and know that empathy is very important. You talk about your son and how profoundly disabled he is and the struggles that go along with that. Can you tell a little bit? I know that there are listeners who have either medically fragile kids or children who have severe disabilities and challenges, and then also others who maybe aren't as profound. How do you, as a homeschool mom of many children, kind of balance the needs? I know that this is a conversation that comes up a lot, or a question that comes up a lot. How do you balance the needs when one of the kids needs so much more than perhaps some of the others? And you're homeschooling them all and trying to meet them where they are each day, right? And give them a little bit of time. How do you tackle that challenge as a homeschool mom?
I think you already touched on it when you said how your family functions like a team. So does ours. And so we very much have that all for one and one for all mentality, knowing that God doesn't make mistakes. He allowed this precious boy to be in this family, not just for my husband and I, but also for his siblings. And so, along with recognizing that this is a team effort, we make sure that we speak the love languages to our children so that they all feel filled up, so that we can make sure we keep a very close eye, keep on the pulse of how is each individual child doing. They don't get brushed to the side simply because their brother has a lot more needs, and they aren't only included just when our family is working as a team. They are uniquely, gorgeously added to our family for a purpose of their own also. And so we do put a focus on that. And we've done that in some ways, like through the hack of the love languages, truly, really getting to know how they can feel loved fast, and then being able to be efficient with that and very authentic and genuine. And also through embracing the struggle, letting them really be open and authentic when they're not having an easy time. And us being accepting of that in a way where there's no criticism or judgment over the kiddos struggling with something. that has been important too, because there is a higher level of stress in a home that has a kiddo with profound needs.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you talked a little bit about love languages here.
Mhm.
How do you, as a mom, because I mean, you're working from home, you're managing all of these challenges, you're nurturing each one individually, and then helping them nurture one another, and getting some academics in there, right?
Yes.
Along with that social and emotional stuff that goes along with being creative, gifted, having learning challenges. How do you kind of pinpoint what those love languages are? I know
Mhm.
for us, I talk about, kind of being a student of your kid. And there was a time where I actually took notes. I took literal notes about each kid to figure out what it was that they did to show love or lit them up. And I would just love to know, kind of from a different perspective, some of the things that you've done to figure out exactly where you can hone in on each kiddo.
Sure. Well, like you said, taking notes is very helpful, but slowing down, being willing to be imperfect. And it's very easy to become very anxious when we have such an extra workload and we know that there's a lot on our shoulders as parents and we want to do it right. And so allowing us ourselves to be imperfect, to love our kids imperfectly, and to be a student of them, just like you said. I had a time where when I was expecting my third, this is before I even had my fourth, but my second was struggling. And I was stuck on couch rest. And it was so eye opening to me how much we can learn about our children when we are forced to hold still. And so if we can just choose to hold still and partner with our child, it's amazing what we'll learn. There are also some good books out there. There is a book specifically for special needs families about the five love languages. Jolene Philo helped co-write a book with Gary Chapman, the five love languages for special needs families. So I highly recommend that one.
Okay, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. You talk, I just saw, I haven't watched the talk yet, but you just recently were on an online conference that I was on too. And we'll link to that in the show notes too, because I know that you can go purchase the recordings and and they're great. There were so many good speakers and so many good topics. Like I'm looking forward to, as a homeschool mom, going back and listening to some of those. But you talk about the philosophy of Charlotte Mason homeschooling. I talk a lot on this podcast about, finding interests and passions and following a more interest-led kind of approach. But everybody comes at homeschooling from a different perspective. And I think it's important to recognize that there's no one right way. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you use that approach when it comes to homeschooling special needs kids?
Absolutely. Well, for us, we actually turned this homeschooling and educational philosophy into a lifestyle. So it's more for us than just a philosophy or a way of having our children digest information. For us, it's actually, we looked at her philosophies and over time, unintentionally at first, implemented them family wide in all of our ways throughout the day. And so we do focus a lot on getting out into nature, learning very organically, keeping lessons short and joyful, reading very quality literature, and then having good conversations around it and allowing the children to tell us what they're learning. So we, as a special needs family, have a lot of stuff going on. Any family who has therapies and medical appointments, and even just a lot of kids can really, I'm sure, understand with the challenges of recording all of what the kids are learning and making the typical school type sitting down for an hour to do one subject, sitting down for another hour to do another subject. Like that, I tried it. It almost broke me. And instead, what happened was putting this philosophy into practice in our daily life every day, even in the summer. It ended up being such an organic, happy way to both educate the children and nurture our relationships that it has fit like a glove for our family. And it does for many families.
How do you throw in the therapies and things like that, and still get a little bit of learning done?
Well, in the days when we would go out to therapy, because right now we were trained, we intentionally went to a neurodevelopmental institute and got trained to do the therapies ourselves over a period of years. But when we were going to therapies, we would do all kinds of memory work in the car through wonderful songs and, on the go learning. And we would read in the waiting room and we would make sure we did a lot of hands on trips. So we would travel to learn history. We would go to Gettysburg. We would go to see Thomas Edison's house. We intentionally submerge the children in the places where we were trying to have them learn a specific topic. And then also, I would take photos of them in front of the different, significant places where they found more joy or where it was relevant to their curriculum that year or whatever, and make them books where they could go back and look, like through Shutterfly or one of those other photo book places.
Mm-hmm.
And it would help as they were reading through their own story. They would then also see the information in front of them, and it would remind them and it would sink in deeper.
I love that. I love that. And that brings up another question, because I know that this is a challenge that a lot of special needs families face, is that idea of traveling with kids who have profound special needs, or just any kind of challenge that, might not, okay, so might be obvious to people around you. That's the one challenge with it, but then might not be obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So can you touch on kind of both those ideas? Like, how do you even do that when you're out in the world and at Gettysburg or whatever, and you've got somebody who is very obviously struggling, but then you have others who are struggling and they don't look like they should be, right? I know that we've faced that a lot in our past, and I've talked a little bit about that. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's played out uniquely in each family. But for us right now, we don't travel much with our son just because his needs are so great. And that's a lack that we feel very greatly in our family. We really miss it. And so, on those rare opportunities when we can travel, which we do very occasionally, get to go camping or something like that, we really have had to set up boundaries around our ability, our willingness to allow what other people think into our hearts, because our son has the privilege and the right to go anywhere any human adult or human period he's got the same rights. And so we try to be considerate though of others as well, and so we try to time our visits to places. Luray Caverns, for example, we just tried to time it when it was going to be far fewer people so he can still go. We would go equipped. We brought what things he would need so that he wouldn't be shrieking or, having a meltdown or whatever. So we came equipped and planned ahead, tried to prepare when there wasn't as high of a volume of other people to be bothered. And then after that, if someone has a problem, we actually just put up our boundaries, don't let that pain in. And honestly, in years gone by, we've received many, many comments very directly. And my mindset had to shift to being that I'm defensive. I feel hurt. I feel like, well, how could they think this about my poor kid? He didn't pick to be this way. Into, oh, this is an opportunity to be an advocate and an ambassador for an entire huge percentage of our population that largely remain hidden. And so in those times when I actually had the opportunity to connect with those people who had been critical, and there have been quite a few, I ended up in the outcome finding out those people were carrying great pain themselves and ended up sharing their story with me. And they were literally just taking out their pain on our family, even though that wasn't right. And I don't know they really realized they were doing it, but turning it around and realizing you can be an ambassador is very powerful.
It's such a healthy and positive turn to take. And I remember, and you were probably the same way, as a young idealistic mom, expecting your first. And you had all these ideas of what, parenting was going to look like and was not going to look like. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating. I was never going to be a mom that let my kids bring devices to places or things like that. And for the longest time, we had one that needed to shut down and take a break. And so one of the tools we always brought to family gatherings and holiday parties or whatever we were trying to brave was the Kindle Fire. And we had rules and boundaries around it too. Your needs are important, but so are the needs of the other people at the party. So you can't plop yourself down on the couch in the middle of the crowd and tune out and be on your Kindle. So we'll scope out the house and talk to our host, whoever it is, grandma, uncle, whatever, and find a spot where if you feel like you need to unplug from the people and plug in to a game or a book or something or an app and detach yourself for a few minutes, you can do that, but it's going to be away from the crowd. So you're not being disrespectful, but your needs are being respected as well. And that's worked. And I think it's important for us to remember that our job isn't to please everybody around us. It's to shepherd the kids that we've been given into the best versions of themselves that they can be. And that means teaching them how to regulate however that looks. My husband regulates by scrolling. If he's had a bad day, he's going to plop himself on the armchair in the family room and he's going to scroll his feed, whatever it is, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, for a little bit before he engages with the family, because he needs to decompress after the long drive and after a day at work. And we need to give our kids tools to be able to self-advocate and self-regulate so that they're able to both respect other people and their boundaries while respecting their own. So it's such an important gift we can give them.
Absolutely. It's a tremendous gift. And I think I love this story of your husband because he's actually modeling to your kids, how he can be what you are offering to them. Here's how you can regulate if you know what it takes, and it's not taking away anything from anybody else. You're just, it's counterbalance, counterbalance.
Absolutely.
It's very healthy.
We need that. We need that. And that whole idea of balance too, especially in a family that has special needs. There's just no such thing. We have to abandon that idea that
That's right.
balance is achievable, because there are going to be seasons where you're more heavily involved in therapies or other things outside the home. There are going to be other seasons where you can't travel, and then other seasons where now things open up to you, right? And It's important for us to recognize that there's no wrong with any of those seasons that we're in. It just is the current season.
I heard it described at one point, and it was, I think, in a book, and it was a brilliant picture. It was a word picture of life, I think in general, really as a family, but especially as a special needs family, where it's like a dance and a ballerina who's on those point shoes. And it appears that she's gliding around so gracefully from the outside. But what's really happening is that she is constantly working very hard to stay balanced on either of those feet, and sometimes on both, but her toes are still just in this constant engaged fit, and she's not really balanced. She's constantly doing that balance, counterbalance act. And for me, that was a very peaceful word picture to explain why I think internally as moms, we can feel the anxiety, we can feel the fear. Is this going to turn out okay? Are we doing everything we can for our child? How am I going to make sure that I also take care of me and my spouse, and all those things that go through our minds, those fears and just doubts. And, I think that's the sensation of being that ballerina, or that foot inside that ballerina's shoe, but from the outside, I have to say, people often will say to me, well, how do you do it? And I think, what do they think they're seeing? Because I'm just keeping it together here,
Absolutely. Hey there. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit more about CTC Math. We've been using it for a few years now, and I had a conversation with my daughter the other day. She came to me and she said, Mom, I was going to the next lesson in my math program, and she said, I looked at it and it's something that I already know how to do. Do you want me to go through and just keep doing it? That seems kind of boring. And so we glanced through the different lessons that were in the unit, and she did. She could tell me exactly what she knew and proved that she knew all of the stuff that was coming up over the next 10 lessons. So I said, okay, skip it. You don't need to do something that you already know how to do, and you just proved to me that you know how to do it. That's just one of the reasons I love CTC Math. I've said before that they are sponsors of this podcast, and I'm so grateful to their sponsorship, but I'm also a customer. I pay for my subscription every year, and I have for the last several years. We are strong supporters of CTC Math. We love them. We appreciate them for so many reasons, and that is just one. And I'm not the only one. I've gotten a couple emails recently. This one's from Jamie. Jamie said, at your recommendation, we switched over to CTC Math last month. We have used another curriculum for several years, but it just wasn't meeting our needs anymore. Now we've settled into a good rhythm. The kids are loving it, and I love that we are able to adapt it for each of their individual needs. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Jamie, I love that, and I was so excited to hear it because it just goes to show I'm not the only one who has had that experience from CTC, being able to adjust on the fly as our kids are learning. I love, love, love that. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, go to ctcmath.com. You will not be sorry. Hey there. Okay, so do you want to make learning to read fun for your kiddos? Check out Reading Eggs. We have used Reading Eggs off and on throughout the years, and all of my kids have loved it. It's a multi-award-winning online reading curriculum for ages 2 to 13. It covers phonics, sight words, comprehension, and so much more. The cool thing is there's so much scientific research that backs it up, and it's trusted by over 20 million users. When you go to their website, you can sign up for a free 30-day trial and get instant access to hundreds of lessons, worksheets, ebooks, and reports on what your kiddos are doing online. It's KidSafe certified, ad-free, and full of all sorts of gamification to give your kiddos exciting rewards, animations, music, all sorts of fun things to motivate your kiddo to learn. Check it out at readingeggs.com/RLL. That's readingeggs.com/RLL. You won't be sorry, and your kids will love you for it. Yeah, I remember back when I first started speaking in the homeschool space in a local co-op that we participated in, kind of peripherally, but we went to a couple classes here and there. We're like, oh, you're a speaker. Would you like to come and speak to our moms? And I'm like, no, no, because you see me like juggling and pulling my kids out of the bathroom where they're unraveling the paper towels or whatever they're doing. This is not the time or place for me to be the expert. I just need to be the mom in this particular situation. And I think that goes right into another part of this conversation as parents of special needs kids, wherever they fall along that special needs spectrum or whatever their challenges or their needs are. We often feel disconnected. We feel like we're different from everybody else, or we're the only ones struggling because everybody looks like they've got it all together. And again, even we do from the outside perspective, because nobody knows the inside of your home as intimately as you. And so how do we kind of combat that feeling of disconnect?
It's been really challenging for my family because of with some immune challenges with our son. It's made it very hard. And so what we ended up doing was, for our family, we established a membership where we have an online community and we can just be real there, let our hair down and say it like it is. Just yesterday, I put a text, into the messenger string with these ladies asking for prayer because we were in a very specific emotional situation with a conversation with our profoundly disabled son, who is nonverbal, but communicates periodically through various methods we've been trained to do. And it's very effective with him. And it was very heartbreaking. And we needed prayer just to be able to process this and to be able to have a safe place. And it's not that people haven't been kind and generous over the years. It's that there's something different when you have somebody who's maybe a different diagnosis, but on the same path as you. And so for us, we've had to find that online. There wasn't anybody in our local co-op. There isn't anybody at our local church who has the level of needs our son does, but we've found that online. And it's been a tremendous gift for us. I'd love to know actually how you guys do it.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, it kind of ebbs and flows, right? Mm-hmm. There have been times where we felt more connected in person to others and other times where we haven't. I told this story in a talk I gave recently, and one of the sessions that I did live over the last in-person convention season, but we were a part of a play group for a while and I thought it was going really well. We had a couple really great connections in there, and my kids are very creative, very quirky. They are innovative and they make up a lot of games and they kind of feed off of each other because each one of my kids has very strong personalities individually. And then when you kind of pull them all together, they can be a force. And at the time, my oldest was doing a little bit of theater. He didn't catch the bug like his younger sister did, but he was rehearsing for the staged version of the radio play War of the Worlds. And when he had auditioned for it, he had requested an ensemble part because the two main characters are the only ones in the show that survive, if you know the story of War of the Worlds. And so the ensemble died repeatedly in different ways because they kept taking on other parts, and he wanted to die as spectacularly as possible in as many different ways as possible. And so he got an ensemble role, and I think he had to die like 7 different ways, by asphyxiation and ray gun and all sorts of other things. And so he and my other children and the neighborhood kids that they all brought into the fold, because my kids are creative and fun, invented a game called Dramatic Deaths. And it was basically this open-ended multi-age game where they just outdied each other as, crazily as possible. And in fact, at the time, I had to have the neighbors and my kids moved the game to the backyard because we were on the route for the police station. And it was very, very convincing, some of these children and their deaths. My now 10-year-old, but 4-year-old at the time, could die by asphyxiation really, really well. And we had cars stop to see if this poor little 4-year-old child was okay as he collapsed in a heap on the front lawn.
Oh,
And
no.
so anyway, they taught this game to the play group. And there were several moms who were not very pleased with the view, the sight of their children dying on the playground. And so we were asked not to play that game anymore. But as psychologist Peter Gray says, he's an expert on play and he talks about play all the time. The best kind of play for any child to engage in is self-directed, self-invented, multi-age, and where they collaborate on the rules. So this game was the literal definition of what true play and the type of play that develops creativity and autonomy and all of the things we want our children to develop entails. And so it had caught on. And even though my kids said, we're not allowed to play anymore, the others just went off away from us and played because it had caught on. So we were then asked to not come back to playgroup for a while, or if we did want to come back, to not bring my oldest, because he was the spark that made the kids remember to play. And so we realized at that time that that was not a group for us, right? It wasn't a safe space. We weren't able to be ourselves. And granted, everybody, people listening, you can play dramatic deaths or you can choose not to watch your kids die. It's totally up to you, whatever your family comfort level is. But you need to, what I've learned over time is that it's important, it's more important to preserve the safe spaces around your children than get them involved in other people just for the sake of connection. And so that was a really good test for me because I enjoyed the parents there, but it clearly wasn't a safe space for my kids to be innovative in themselves. And whether they wanted to play this game or a different game or whatever is more irrelevant than the fact that it wasn't a place where they could show their creativity. So we ended up finding another group, but that, like you said, has been very difficult over the years. And so we've tried a bunch of different places, and we had been a part of a co-op for a while that was wonderful, but closed down over the pandemic and didn't resurrect afterwards. So the most success that we've had over the years with regards to finding good, solid connections for our kids individually and then our family as a whole is individually finding out what their interests and their passions are and getting them involved in group classes or programs that feed into those interests and passions. And then for our family as a whole, holding on to those safe families and making a point to get together. One of our closest homeschool families ended up going back to school, and we still create opportunities to get together with that family, even though it takes a little bit more logistical, I don't know, tactics and warfare in some cases to get us together because we're on such opposite schedules. So hanging on to those that feel safe and that you know are good relationships and good connections, finding things individually for our kids. And then we did the same thing. We found a couple different places online that we connect with or that we enjoy. And then, as you know, because we've talked about it, I've created my own. And so we have the Learners Lab for families who are creative and gifted, twice exceptional, or any kind of neurodivergency. And that's been really great too, because the opportunity to connect, and this goes along with the resource that you're talking about, and we'll link to that in the show notes too. It's a good opportunity for families, moms in particular, to find others who get what they're going through and then can also be there to support them and talk them off of a ledge and potentially have their kids connect through the virtual space, because we're living in a world that allows us to break down those walls and reach out. When you're raising outliers, which we both are, no matter what end of that bell curve they fall, they're outliers. And when you're raising outliers, that means it's not going to be super easy to find others like you in your location, in your physical location. So you need to be creative about it. So that's my suggestion, is be creative about it.
Yep, I could not agree more with everything you said. 100%. Just figure out for your unique family. And that's what we've had to do. Whether it's online, we've had all of our friends move away for the most part who had kids that could come over. We still try to import as many as we can, but that game your son made is hilarious.
Yeah. I've
I'm
gotten
sorry it ended badly.
it did well, and you know what? They still play it actually, and they're 20 down to 10, and I get messages from families whose kids were sitting in on one of my talks live at a homeschool conference or convention, and they'll say my daughter brought that game to our neighborhood and they're all loving it. So it's far reaching now. We've created this game that is like crossing the borders of the different states. And actually, I think there's even a couple families in Canada who are playing that game. So, it's an international game now. We've created a sensation. Oh my gosh. It is really disconcerting, though, I will tell you, to watch a 4-year-old like clutch his throat and pass out and look legitimately not alive.
I would probably panic personally as a parent, but it's wonderful. Kids give us such a good example of being creative. And as parents, it's so easy to lose sight of that, but that is how we make it. That really is, relying on God, pulling together as a family team and being willing to think outside the box. It's huge.
Absolutely. Okay, so what is your community called? And tell us just a little bit about what you offer inside of it.
Sure. So it's called the Greater Honor, which was the name that we felt very led to give because there is a chapter in Corinthians that talks about the church and how the hidden parts receive the greater honor. And as a family with children with so many various needs, we have in many ways felt like it's been a challenge to make those connections like we just talked about. And we've seen other families struggle far more than we have struggled. And so we feel that oftentimes not just the child with challenges, but the family around that child is hidden. And yet it's an honor to have this person in our family. This person was chosen for us for a purpose. And so we named it the Greater Honor. And right now it's still a small fledgling group that is wildly supportive of one another. It is beautiful. And what we do right now is we connect with one another intentionally. We meet once a month. We have experts come in. So because of my long-term experiences with many, many experts, I bring them in. So we've worked through self-care. We're working through emotional processing. We've worked through understanding learning disabilities. I brought in one of the top speakers on learning disabilities and had her go through her philosophy on how we can interact with these children to truly inspire them and pull out the gifts that they have in them. And so each month we have an expert, we have connection, and we have some things coming up that are very important to us. We really want to include a space for the dads. We will probably most likely have lesser response there at first. We expect that, but there is very, very little out there that we have found to support dads who have kids with challenges, and they need that space too. And then eventually to also have a group for siblings, which right now will be last because there will be a lot more to navigate with that, but definitely. It's going well.
Good. Yeah. Good. Okay. So we will link to that on the show notes. And yeah, so before we wrap up here, what would you say, what would be the kind of single biggest takeaway that you would want listeners who are also struggling with that idea of homeschooling challenges to take away from this episode and remember as they're kind of like turning it off and finishing the dishes and finishing their walk or whatever it is they're doing right now?
The first thing that pops to my mind is just to remind any mom who's listening that she's not alone. We don't have to travel this journey alone. It can feel very lonely. It can feel very confusing, but you don't have to do it alone. And so go find that community, get creative. Colleen and I both are people who have done that and have made those communities intentionally because we needed it. So there are communities out there. And so just know you're not alone. Don't choose to be alone if you don't have to.
I love that. Okay, where can people find you online?
Well, there are two places. The first is my podcast, Her Home and Heart, and that's on Apple, Spotify, and all the places. And then the second is actually, surprisingly, my Linktree. It's just Linktree/Family Success. I love to change up the coupons and goodies and freebies and fun things that are happening. My website's currently under construction, so we just stick with this simple little Linktree.
I love that. Yeah, I know all about website construction. It is a joy and a challenge, speaking of.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. We will link to everything in the show notes for this episode over at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. And I'll be back same time, same place next week. with another great episode. In the meantime, have a great week with your kids. Thanks so much for tuning in and sharing your day with us. Bye for now.